Hello learners, welcome to this course on preparation of research proposal in social sciences. I am Dr. Pratik Chaurasia, Assistant Professor, Faculty of Education, Banaras Hindu University. Today we are going to discuss our lecture number 24, which is based on type of hypothesis. In the previous lecture, we have discussed how to formulate the hypothesis and how it is related to the research question and objectives. But today we are going to discuss types of hypothesis in a detailed manner, that what kind of hypothesis you can have and what are the utilities of that hypothesis in a research. So let us begin and discuss key learning themes for today's lecture. First is introduction to types of hypothesis, null hypothesis versus alternative hypothesis, directional hypothesis versus non-directional hypothesis, statistical hypothesis and empirical hypothesis, simple hypothesis and complex hypothesis, associative and causal hypothesis, hypothesis versus prediction, and lastly concluding discussion. So we'll discuss this one by one. So let us begin. Introduction to type of hypothesis. You can see here on the screen that we have already discussed about what is hypothesis, how significant it is in a research, and now we are going to discuss what are the various types of hypothesis. You can see here on the screen null hypothesis, alternative hypothesis. Few basic idea about these two type of hypothesis we have already discussed. Today we will discuss this in a detail also. Simple hypothesis, complex hypothesis, statistical hypothesis and empirical hypothesis. Hypotheses are classified based on their function in research, whether to predict, to compare or to discover. This is very interesting to be understood by a researcher, that when you have a research proposal, when you have a research idea with you, the demand and nature of the research are different because it varies from context to context. Therefore, since the contexts are varied, since the design is varied, demand of the research is varied, and nature of the study is varied, you have to choose very judiciously and accurately that which kind of hypothesis is required for which kind of a situation. So these are the six kind of a major types of hypothesis. Now we'll discuss this one by one. Introduction to type of hypothesis. Hypotheses are not just about proving something, they guide and frame your research. We have already discussed this, and now we have to understand this, that how they guide and frame your research. Second is, apart from null and alternative, there are complex, simple, non-directional, directional, statistical, associative and causal hypotheses are also there. They do not necessarily have to be exclusive. This is significant to be understood, that they do not necessarily have to be exclusive, as one hypothesis can fall under more than one category, but knowing the distinctions between them will make it easy for you to construct your own. So you can see here that various kind of hypotheses are there, and they are very close to each other in terms of their nature, but they are distinct with respect to demand of the study. What is the demand of the study? What is the nature of the study? And you have to plan and design your hypothesis accordingly. So let us discuss one by one what is null hypothesis and what is alternative hypothesis. What is null hypothesis? A null hypothesis proposes no relationship between two variables, denoted by H naught. It is a negative statement. Generally, it's a thing where it does not make a relationship between two variables. It does not make a relationship between two variables. For example, there is no significant relationship between A and B. There is no significant relationship between A and B. Let us see an example here. Attending counseling session does not affect students in class performance. It's a kind of a aspect that null hypothesis covers. Alternative hypothesis. Now what is alternative hypothesis? In scientific research, the alternative hypothesis, symbolized as H1 or sometimes HA, depends upon the situation and demand which one you are using, proposes that there is a real effect, relationship or difference between variable. Now you can clearly see that what is the difference between null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis. That hypothesis which is null in nature proposes no relationship between two variable. It proposes no relationship between two variable. Whereas alternative hypothesis, it proposes that there is a real effect, relationship or difference between variable. We can see with the help of example here, attending counseling session improves in class performance. Directional hypothesis versus non-directional hypothesis. This is also a very important kind of a hypothesis, and as it is suggested by name that it is talking about some ways. Some ways means some direction. So let us see. Alternative hypotheses are basically classified into two major types of hypothesis, that is directional hypothesis and non-directional hypothesis. A directional hypothesis is a specific type of hypothesis in research that predicts not just that there is a relationship between two variables, but also the direction of that relationship. In other words, it states whether the effect will be positive or negative. Whereas non-directional hypothesis, a non-directional hypothesis often called a two-tailed hypothesis. Two-tailed hypothesis predict that there will be a difference or an effect, but does not specify the direction of the difference or effect. In other words, it simply states that a relationship exists, but it does not predict whether it will be positive or negative, increase or decrease, etc. Now, here one thing we have to understand, that what is basic difference between directional hypothesis and non-directional hypothesis. You can see when we are talking about a directional hypothesis, we are telling that it just not that there is a relationship between two variables. It not just predict that there is a relationship between two variables, but also the direction of relationship. Or we can say it gives you the result or effect in a positive or negative sense. But non-directional hypothesis, which is also called two-tailed hypothesis, and here I will just highlight one more thing, that directional hypotheses are also known as one-tailed hypothesis, and non-directional hypothesis, as you can see here, is known as two-tailed hypothesis. So you can remember it by this, that directional hypothesis is a one-tailed and non-directional is two-tailed. So you can see that two-tailed hypothesis generally predicts that there will be a difference or an effect, but does not specify direction or of that difference or effect. It simply says that there will be a difference. So any hypothesis which is being written in this form will be known as non-directional hypothesis when it does not reflect the specific direction of difference, whereas a hypothesis which makes a sense of direction of the relationship will be known as directional hypothesis or one-tailed hypothesis. Some example of directional hypothesis, you can make a note of it. Example 1, athletes who engage in strength training 3 times a week will have faster sprint time than those who do not. It's a kind of a directional hypothesis. Example number 2, a student who receive personalized tutoring will perform better on a standardized test than students who do not receive tutoring. Example 3, individuals who practice mindfulness meditation daily will experience lower levels of anxiety compared to those who do not meditate. Now you can see here in all these 3 examples of directional hypothesis, each of these hypotheses predict a specific effect and the direction of that effect. Direction means how it will affect, positively, negatively. For example, you can see example number 1, athletes who engage in strength training 3 times a week will have faster sprint. Here faster sprint is a positive aspect, that the athlete who will practice more they will have more faster sprint. It's a positive kind of a relationship between strength training and faster sprint. Therefore, you can say that this hypothesis predict a specific effect as well as direction of that effect. Let us consider example 2 also. A student who receive personalized tutoring will perform better on standardized tests than students who do not receive tutoring. Here, it is telling that those who do not receive that tutoring, they may not perform well. Again, it's a directional. Again, it's giving direction, maybe in a negative aspect. Therefore, you can see that example number 2 also predict a specific effect and the direction of that effect. And always remember that direction may be positive, negative, high, low, whatever it is. But the moment a hypothesis predict effect as well as the direction of that effect, it comes under the category of directional hypothesis. Example number 3, let us explain this also. Individuals who practice mindfulness meditation daily will experience lower levels of anxiety compared to those who do not meditate. Again, it is giving a specific effect as well as direction of that effect. So remember, when you form a hypothesis and it predicts a specific effect as well as give some certain direction of that effect, it comes under the category of directional hypothesis and it is termed as one-tailed hypothesis. Example of non-directional hypothesis. Example 1. There will be a significant difference in test score between students who study with music and those who study in silence. Now you can clearly see that the effect is there. Effect is there, but whether it is positive, negative, we don't know. Simply there will be a significant difference, but what kind of significant difference, whether the difference will be positive or negative, it simply says there will be a significant difference in test scores between students who study with music and those who study in silence. Example number 2. There will be a significant difference in exam scores between a student taught online and a student taught in person. Again, you can see effect is there, but what kind of effect, whether positive, negative, high, low, is not clear. Since the effect direction is not clear, this kind of hypothesis is called non-directional hypothesis or two-tailed hypothesis. Example number 3. There will be a significant difference in sprint speed between athletes using training program A and those using training program B. So again, you can very clearly see this, that in a non-directional hypothesis, definitely significant difference is being mentioned, but effect is mentioned, but effect will be high, low, positive, negative, nothing is clear. Then this kind of hypothesis are termed as non-directional hypothesis or two-tailed hypothesis. Now, statistical hypothesis versus empirical hypothesis. So what is a statistical hypothesis? A statistical hypothesis is a statement about a population parameter like a mean, proportion or relationship between variables that you can test using statistical methods. Now here interesting thing is that you have to understand that statistical hypotheses are basically of two types. First is null hypothesis H0 and second is alternative hypothesis H1 or HA. So you can make a relationship between null hypothesis, alternative hypothesis and statistical hypothesis. Empirical hypothesis. An empirical hypothesis claims a theory validation via experiments and observation. This is why the statements appear justificable and different from wild guesses. Example, women who take iron supplements have a lower risk of anemia compared to those taking vitamin B12. Next is simple hypothesis versus complex hypothesis. Now what is simple hypothesis? It's a hypothesis is a statement made to reflect the relation between exactly two variables, one independent and one dependent. Example, smoking is a prominent cause of lung cancer. The dependent variable lung cancer is dependent on the independent variable smoking. Now, this kind of a hypothesis are the simplest form of hypothesis that one researcher can make, where you make a cause and effect relationship exactly by knowing which one is dependent and which one is independent variable. And I have already mentioned in the previous lecture also that when you form a research hypothesis, be very clear about your variables, because the moment you are clear about your variables, it makes a very clear sense that you are going to formulate a cause effect relationship between them. Example, you can see here, as smoking is a prominent cause of lung cancer, the dependent variable lung cancer is dependent on independent variable, that is smoking. Next is complex hypothesis. Complex hypothesis. A complex hypothesis implies a relationship between multiple independent and dependent variable. Now here it comes very important to understand that what is the basic difference between simple hypothesis and complex hypothesis, and you as a researcher have to make your statement also that which kind of hypothesis suits more to you, whether you look more forward towards simple hypothesis or you look about complex hypothesis. But as a researcher, it is always recommended that if you can have simple hypothesis, because hypothesis is something which you are ultimately going to test further to establish something, to come to some certain conclusion. Therefore, if you make so difficult kind of hypothesis which are complex in nature, it becomes difficult for a researcher to make a relationship and make predictions out of it. So, a complex hypothesis implies a relationship between multiple independent and dependent variable. You can form one by one, you can form uh, more hypotheses instead of forming one single complex hypothesis. Let us consider one example here. Individuals who eat more fruits tends to have higher immunity, lesser cholesterol and high metabolism. Now, you can see here clearly that we have taken three things together. Individual who eat more fruits tends to have higher immunity, lesser cholesterol and high metabolism. Here, fruit eating habits have been related to three different aspects, and as a researcher, if you look into this, it becomes difficult for you to articulate and actually test this kind of hypothesis further. So, it is better and advised that when you form a hypothesis, do not go with complex hypothesis, because it can create problem for you, problem in terms of testing. So, it is better you can form a hypothesis like that. Individual who eat more fruit tends to have higher immunity, hypothesis number 1. Individuals who eat more fruits tends to have lesser cholesterol, hypothesis number 2. Individuals who eat more fruits tends to have higher metabolism, hypothesis number 3. And here it's a important thing to understand that all variables are positively associated with the other variable, that is fruit eating trends. So it is important for you to understand that how it affects each other, and since it all are positively associated, it has become easy for an individual to make a complex hypothesis keeping all the variable together. Otherwise, it may create problem. Therefore, it is recommended and suggested that you identify your independent variable and dependent variable and form simple, small and to the point hypothesis related to your objective of the study. So, avoid making this kind of complex hypothesis. Associative and causal hypothesis. This is another types of hypothesis. So, let us see what is associative hypothesis. Associative hypothesis, change in one variable affect another, but no cause effect claimed. Here also, One variable affects another is being mentioned, but no cause effect claimed. Example, increase in screen time is associated with decrease in sleep quality. You can see clearly, again two variables are there and effect is associated there, but since no cause effect is claimed, it is a simply associative hypothesis. Second is causal hypothesis. Causal hypothesis means which focuses on direct cause effect between variable. Direct cause effect between variable. Example, excessive screen time causes poor sleep quality. And among all this aspect, all these types of hypothesis, you can see one thing is very common. One thing is very common, that all hypotheses are intended to form a relationship which should be examined further. You can clearly see and recall that whether it is null hypothesis, alternative hypothesis, or other kind of hypothesis, all hypotheses are trying to make a relationship between variables which is to be tested further. And the moment you test your hypothesis, you come up with some result that yes, this is because of this. B is affected by A, or A is affected by B, or increase in A has caused this much increase in B. So you can conclude this, that hypothesis is an important component which establishes a relationship between variables to some certain effect related to context and situation as well as nature of the study. Now this is important to be understood, that hypothesis versus prediction. As a researcher, it is very important to understand that what is hypothesis and what is prediction, because it's a very thin line difference between these two major aspects. And when you are forming your research proposal, you have to avoid one thing, that you are looking more forward toward prediction. This is very important and recommended. Please make a note of it, that when you are making a research proposal, do not intend to make prediction. Avoid it. Do not intend to make prediction. Why? Let us see here. What is hypothesis? In a very normal term, it's educated guess. It's educated guess backed by evidences or theory. Very important to be understood, that whatever hypothesis you have formed, it has been backed by some certain evidences or theory. And what will be that evidences? Evidences in the form of already existing research, evidences in the form of literature review, evidences in the form of research article that you have studied related to your topic or in a more comprehensive manner. Second is, hypothesis is testable via scientific methods. This is very significant, that how hypothesis differ from prediction. Hypothesis is a tentative statement that is subject to be testable via scientific method. A researcher makes an attempt, a scientific attempt, to test whatever has been formed as a research hypothesis. And the moment you test your hypothesis, you come up with some output. And this is how research grows, this is how outcomes are derived, and this is how researchers move forward in terms of completing their research. And you can examine and you can understand this, that how this hypotheses are playing key role in providing a solid framework to your research idea which you have articulated. One example is here. You can see planets revolve around the sun. Definitely, when you form this kind of statement, you have a very genuine and scientific logic behind this. You are doing an educational guess. Yes, we do agree that hypothesis is a tentative statement, but it's not a casual statement. Please try to understand this thing, that it's not a casual statement. It's a statement which is formed on some certain logic, so formed on some certain theory, which is tentative and subject to be tested. Whereas we can see now prediction. Prediction is simply future or further assumptions, often without evidences. And in prediction, I will differentiate here that a researcher can bring their experience, can bring their feeling, can bring their emotions while they predict something. But when you form a hypothesis, you do not use this thing. You use your observation, you use literature review, you use your experiences, you use various kind of available literature review and supporting evidences in terms of forming a hypothesis. But in prediction, you predict, maybe emotional predict, you are emotionally predicting that this will happen, but it is not immediately testable, not testable also, and you will not have any kind of a scientific methods also to test it. Therefore, it is recommended that you make a proper differentiation between hypothesis and prediction and avoid predicting anything in your research. Instead of that, you are framing a well crafted hypothesis. One example you can see here: COVID-19 will be eradicated by 2030. This is not going to help anyone out. How it will be eradicated, how you can give answers to some certain problem, that is the purpose of research. That is the purpose of research. So overall, try to understand difference between hypothesis and prediction, and it is recommended that avoid making unevidence based statement in the form of prediction. Make statements in the form of hypothesis which should be testable via scientific methods. Concluding discussion for today's lecture: hypotheses give your research a clear direction. We have discussed it many times. Again, I am highlighting it that what kind of hypothesis you are making is extremely important to be understood, that what is the context and demand of your research. If you are understanding the context and demand of your research, definitely your hypothesis which you will form will give you a clear direction to move forward accordingly. Second is, different types helps match the complexity and nature of your study. Research have different kinds of complexities and nature, and since it has a different kinds of complexities and nature, you as a researcher look very sincerely into this aspect, that what kind of hypothesis formation is going to help you. Because I am again highlighting, the way you form your hypothesis, you are moving forward accordingly. You have to select design, you have to select tool and related aspect of your research according to your hypothesis, because you have to test it, that whether what I have formed is correct or not. So different types of hypothesis helps to match the complexity and nature of your study. Third is, knowing how hypotheses differ from predictions build scientific credibility. This is important, that how you form your hypothesis is just not only helping you to do your research, but at the same time it helps you to build your scientific credibility. Because when you recall the previous lectures, hypothesis has a deep background in literature review, it has a deep background in the studies that you have seen, it has a deep background with the scientific evidences that you have. Therefore, when you form your hypothesis, especially related to the context of your research and demand of your research, you are improving and building a good scientific credibility of your research as well as your research competencies also. So it is recommended that when you form a research hypothesis, please take care of these all things. And in the last, I would say, without a hypothesis, a researcher is like a ship without a compass, because you don't know where to go, what to do, and what to do for achieving your research objectives. So in a nutshell, I will say, when you make your research hypothesis, please be very cautious about that important things. And well framed hypothesis is a well idea that you are going to execute for implementing your research ideas. So this is all from this lecture. Thank you so much.